With the latest agriculture news from across the state and nation, it's time for the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. Here's your host, Sabrina Halvorson.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us this morning here on the AgNet News Hour. I am Sabrina Halvorson here with Lorrie. Good morning.
Well, good morning.
So we are going to start out the morning talking about rats. And I don't know, I feel like anytime you have to start out with talking about rats, it's probably not good. But we're talking about, so rats have been causing a problem in some orchards, especially in the Central Valley area. And, rats can be a problem for all kinds of agriculture. And the California Department of Food and Agriculture has recently hosted a special demonstration day in Western Fresno County to talk about monitoring and controlling rats in tree nuts. So now the problem with the rats in orchards especially is that not so much that they are getting the nuts, but it's the damage that they do to the ground and to irrigation systems. And we know how expensive irrigation systems are. So when you have to repair or replace parts of your irrigation system because of rat damage, that can be really costly.
I lived in Southeast Colorado for a number of years, and there was a lot of underground drip line irrigation out there for field crops. This was an ongoing problem, and I don't know how many times we talked about rodent issues, and not just rats, but there were some other underground issues with other animals, but rats were the primary concern. And so I remember talking a lot about this. So it's interesting that this is popping back up here in my farm broadcasting career.
It is. It is really interesting. I kind of thought the same thing when I saw this news release come through. And the release that I got was originally from the Western Agricultural Processors Association and talking about the amount of damage that they mention rats specifically, but you're right. There are other types of rodents too that contribute to this. But so an estimate, CDFA released an economic impact report, and it said somewhere between 100 and 300 million dollars, between 100 million and 300 million dollars in the form of losses caused by rat damage to irrigation and other things around the orchards. That's a big loss for the nut industry.
It really is. I mean, you think about the time it takes to replace all the different lines and all the different irrigation materials, but also the cost, as we know, the cost of materials, anything ag, has gone up substantially. So that price tag probably is going to keep going up.
Yeah, I can only imagine because especially right now with, uh, just how things are going with the economy and different trade issues and things like that, cost of everything is just going up. And so as we continue to look at these problems in the orchard, again, and also with a lack of skilled labor and things like that, this is going to continue to be a major problem unless you can actually get the rat situation under control. And that's been one of the problems is how do you get the rat situation under control, this population of rats around, Western Fresno County, and the financial assistance, the amount of money it's going to take, not just to repair everything, but also for looking at different, how do you, I don't know, how do you control rats out in your orchard? It's just such a big problem.
Yeah, and that I don't know a whole lot, to be honest, about how you control rats. I know with prairie dogs, those are a big issue for me growing up, for my family operation, and still a lot of controversy on prairie dogs and controlling prairie dogs because there's a lot of pushback from the people who want to preserve them. But those farmers who have tried to control prairie dogs have a couple different options. I don't know if this applies to rats or not, but there is they use poisoned oats, like pellets that look like oats for them that they would drop in the ground, or they of course went out and literally bombed them. So that would tear up your irrigation equipment. So I don't think bombing is a good idea, but I'm wondering if there's some sort of poison that can be dropped in. But when we were talking about these like orchards and nut trees and such, I mean, wow, this is a high value crop. And I'm sure you have to be real careful about what you use for poisons and control methods.
Hmm. Yeah, you do. And especially again, in California, and Colorado is close to being the same way, but also we have so many different regulations involved as well. It makes controlling any kind of pest a little bit more difficult. And so, there are a lot of guidelines you have to follow, there's a lot of rules you have to follow, and then there's the financial cost. So anytime you have a pest like this, and again, it's not necessarily one that you would automatically think of, unless obviously you're a tree nut grower who knows this, but just to the general public too, when you think about agricultural pests, rodents, rats is not the first thing that comes to mind. I always automatically think about, our bugs.
Yeah, me too, actually. That's a good point. I was doing just a little bit of just quick looking on like how you can control rats. Now, I don't know if this can be done commercially, but it does look like people are using live traps, electric traps, bait stations, things like that. So I'm sure that can be done around the fruit trees. I just don't know how costly that is, but it does look like some people are using that around their fruit trees, physical barriers. And there was looking for droppings. You can look for nibbled fruits and gnaw marks if you want to see if you do have those infestations. Because I'm sure that, especially if you're using anything underground, it takes a little while to realize that you have that damage because you can't
Yeah.
see it right away. I would also assume with some of the new technologies that's out there with the monitors or all these drones or things like that, you can probably find that a lot quicker than we used to be able to. But I think those are some of the ways that we can at least get in there and try to help control them. But I can't imagine, Sabrina, the cost of using these things. And you have to keep it up. It can't just be done one time.
Right. This is an ongoing problem. It's not like you get rid of the rats and then you don't have any more. They keep coming back. I mean, they're rats. We're chatting this morning, starting off talking about rats in orchards. This primarily the news release that started our conversation, coming from Western Fresno County, where in orchards they're having a problem with rats. And we talked about the CDFA had an economic impact report saying between 100 million and 300 million dollars is lost to irrigation system repair and replacements, yield loss, equipment damage, and other impacts caused by these rats out in the orchards. So it's not so much that they're getting the product. They're not getting, the tree nuts or the fruits or whatever off the trees. It's that they're causing so much damage to everything in the orchard that it's become such a big problem.
Here's another little tidbit I found. This is really interesting. So, according to ratremoval.org,
Hmm.
researchers at the University of California say wet weather conditions create the ideal breeding conditions for fast breeding rats. I had no idea that wet weather, I don't see why, though. I don't really see why, but how wet weather actually contributes to rat breeding. That is really interesting.
I don't know. It's a cold, stormy day out, so you light a little fire and play some music. I mean, what are
Huh.
the? I have no idea how that would affect rat breeding. Um, Also, I mean, this isn't an area that gets a lot of that wet weather, so I don't know if that's an improvement or not. I mean, gee, you pray for rain and all it brings is rats. That's unfortunate.
Yeah, yeah. And our article we're referring to today doesn't say a whole lot about this, but I do know in covering these things over the years with regard to rodents, prairie dogs, all these pests in general, is that they do carry a lot of disease. And
Hmm.
so that has always been an issue, and the disease in their feces and their nests and such can get into your domestic livestock and can get into your pets, your dogs and what have you, but also can even translate into humans getting some of these different diseases that and sicknesses that are carried by the pests or by these rodents.
Yeah, yeah, and they bring in other like food safety issues
Oh
as
yeah.
well. And as a grower, you have to be even more cognizant of any food safety issues that a rat infestation, even if it's, we're talking about the orchard, so we're talking about outside. We're not talking about even like in a processing plant, which would be a whole nother situation. But even outside, again, for it, and I say this primarily for consumers who are listening. We don't want to scare we don't mean to be scaring anybody off of our wonderfully freshly grown fruits and vegetables and tree nuts and things out here in California. But, when you're growing things outside, wildlife happens. Unfortunately, rats are part of the wildlife and they are going to cause a problem. But the mitigation and finding ways to control these rats, again, we talked about the cost of damage, but you mentioned a little bit ago too, the cost of controlling them as well. Like how much does it cost to put out these traps, or if you are able to use poison in your situation or whatever for these rats, how much is that going to cost as well? And it's like this is a problem that's we're not going to stop completely. And I hate that when there's a problem that, like, no matter how much you do to control it, it's always going to keep coming back. So you have to constantly be fighting these darn rats.
Yeah, it is just one more thing that these poor farmers and ranchers have to deal with. We just have so many things that they're already working with, with regard to weather, rules and regulations, all these things you and I have talked about in the last few weeks with new changes in administration, high input costs, trade issues, and and then of course the regular farming things like rats.
Yeah, right. Gosh, it's just so hard to be a farmer.
It is. So kudos to them. We appreciate it. Sabrina and I like our oranges and our almonds, as we've talked about. Pistachios is a big thing around my house. We love those. So we just
Hmm.
appreciate everything these farmers and ranchers are doing to bring that to our tables.
Yeah, absolutely. So please keep fighting the rats.
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about another big issue for all farmers in California, and that is, of course, water. We're going to be looking at water in one specific area of the state and talking about some things going on there. We are going to chat about water for a little bit, looking at another article that came through talking about water again out in the Kern area and some things that are going on there. Lori, why don't you go ahead and explain a little bit?
All right. I'm going to do my best to explain and not be too confusing because, as you and I talked about right before we started our segments here today, this is very confusing to me, very complicated. Anytime you talk about water issues, they can get complicated real quick. But basically, the State Water Resources Control Board has just recently voted to give Kern County water managers, more time to develop plans that they need to put into place because they have an overdrafted sub-basin. This is not a new issue. They have been working with this. They've already turned in plans a couple of times. Those plans have needed work, not rejected necessarily, but sent back to the drawing board, if you will, because they really need to work on getting more inclusive and more meat, I guess, in the matter, because they have to bring the sub-basin into balance by the year 2040. So the new deadline to make revisions to their plans is coming up on June 20th. They did submit their last set of plans last December. That was the fourth set of plans. So this will be the fifth. So anyway, there was a hearing on this, a lot of discussion amongst board members and stakeholders that went over this, and just some of those things coming out of here. And there is a lot of details, by the way, that came out of here. But some of the things that came out of here and that need to be added for sure for the next set of plans is that the Kern County Board really needs, water managers really needs to bring in working with community members and small farmers in the area. It appears, according to this article, that those two groups were left out when they've been drafting these plans. So they need to be more inclusive on what that means for those that are around them, for the sub-basin people that live and work right around them. And so that's going to be something that will have to be added in there. Here's another thing, and I did an interview on this not too long ago, and it is called subsidence. But basically what it is, ground is sinking in the area as well. So these plans are going to have to account for some of that land is sinking. We can talk a little bit more about why some of that land is sinking, but it is. And so ultimately, these plans have to address some of the nearby stakeholders, have to address more than they already do on ground sinking, and also make sure that there is enough drinking water wells that won't go dry by the year 2040.
Yeah, this is just all such a big issue. So going to the subsidence issue, that was actually something when I lived in Madera County. on a very small scale, just basically on my property in my house. We had that issue, and what was causing it then in that area was again the groundwater. There wasn't the groundwater that there had been at one time, many hundreds of years ago, but so the ground was settling because there wasn't that moisture content in the ground. So the ground would settle down and compact down, and that can cause a lot of different problems with anything from like the foundation of a home to your roads and things like that because the ground is settling, compacting down without that groundwater moisture, if you will. And this is vastly an oversimplification of it, but that's kind of part of the issue again with losing water throughout the state. When your soil dries out like that, it compacts down and that causes everything to shift. And that can be a very big and infrastructure issue. This subsidence, it's a big problem. It truly is. And how on earth can you combat that?
Yeah. So just to back up what you're saying, according to an article on MSN.com, most of the sinking is due to basically what you just said: soil compaction, erosion, and groundwater withdrawal. And then also, what else does it say? Oh, it's also talking about deflation of underground aquifers. So suck that water out. It's literally shrinking the soil particles together, which is then causing those loose particles to be pressed, which means that there is sinking.
Right.
If that makes sense.
It does. Yeah. And that's exactly what happens. It's just anytime that you take mud, let's say, and you let it dry out and dries into dirt, the dirt amount that you have once all that water is gone is smaller. It's a smaller amount than the mud was when you had the water. I don't know if I just made it more complicated or not,
No,
but
actually, I think
yes.
that was a really good visual, I think, for me.
Yeah.
That was a good visual. Now, according to both articles that we're referring to today, a lot of people are saying it's because of oil and gas extraction activities. So not necessarily agriculture causing it to happen.
Right. But agriculture does play a part in this, or this issue is important to agriculture. Let me reverse what I'm saying here and make it accurate. This issue, while not necessarily caused by agriculture, is a problem for agriculture.
Yeah.
And then, of course, anytime that we're talking about water, you mentioned that in this article that we're looking at, it talked about having to do some of these hearings again because ag wasn't included in the first time. How can you be talking about water in in the Kern area or anywhere in Central California and not include agriculture? I'm astonished by this.
That was exactly my question. And I wondered why that wasn't more of a headline topic for these articles as well, because I totally agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah. How could you not invite ag? See, that's why we're constantly saying that you have to talk about ag so much because if you don't, nobody else will. And I know that you and I both go out and speak to different organizations and things about how to talk about ag. And that's one thing that we're always pointing out is that if we don't create a space at the table for ourselves, nobody else will. And here is an example of that.
When I talk about like media training or telling your story, I always say, if you don't tell your story, somebody else will tell it for you. So there you go.
And that's bad. We are talking about water now. We are looking at an article that talks about the State Water Resources Control Board that has extended Kern County's deadline for refining its groundwater management plans. Now, you pointed out, but let's point it out again, this is not the first time these plans have been sent back to the drawing board. This, in fact, is like the fourth or fifth time. So they keep making these plans and drawing up these ideas and then being sent back to fix it, to make it better, because things that they're not including insufficient protection for drinking water wells. We talk about the importance of ag. Providing drinking water for communities is equally important, and some of those protections have not been included fully in these plans. So they have to keep going back and fixing them. So what happens as they keep going back and having to fix these? What happens if we don't have these plans in place by 2030? That's only 5 years away.
Yeah. I think it's 2040. So actually,
Oh yeah, 2040, excuse me.
okay. Okay. Yeah, exactly. And it talks about the plan. I love this. This I'm reading directly from this mavensnotebook.com. The plans are still not protective enough of drinking water wells, allowing up to 255 wells to go dry. by the year 2040. Now, when we talk about a pretty populated state, California, 255 wells doesn't seem like a lot. But when you're talking about a rural area and you're talking about people who are relying on this water for their households, their animals and such, that is actually a lot of wells. Really is.
It is. It truly is. And we have seen places during some of our worst droughts that we have seen towns that have been without drinking water. People are having to get bottled water brought in, or tubs of water brought in, just so that they can do things like brush their teeth and forget bathing when you're in an extreme drought situation like that. You're lucky if you get to take a shower once a week because you don't have water to drink. And we have seen this before I was even in Ag News, when I was working general news in Central California. I remember a summer where we had to do so many stories about communities that were without water because these wells went dry. And when you're talking about withholding water like that, this is not a hypothetical situation. This is something that some of our communities have already seen, and it is a very serious threat for them.
I don't envy Kern County water managers at all because of all these complicated things that we've been talking about. But as we continue talking about our drinking wells here, there's a thing called minimum threshold, and that is the lowest, like rock bottom line of these groundwater levels that we need to avoid, because after you hit that minimum threshold, if it goes any lower than that, then it's considered a dry well. These managers are having to take this into account, exactly what we're talking about. But here's another complication to this whole thing, is that other agencies in other nearby areas of Kern County that are also managing their wells and their water, they have way different thresholds. So you have to, I guess, it's like a puzzle, and figure out what is your neighbor's threshold versus your threshold so that you can identify how to manage that water. Wow. And the experts and people you have to bring into this. And then, as well as I do, even experts have different opinions and different backgrounds on what makes them say the things they think. I do not feel sorry for these folks. I mean,
I
I
know.
feel very sorry for these folks. Excuse me. I feel very sorry for these folks that have to try to figure this out. And then once they draw up their plans, this is what I wonder too, is that things can change so much, so drastically. Weather patterns, especially in California, and I've interviewed a number of weather meteorologists here in the last few months, are expected to be even more volatile than before. Of course, they say a lot of it is due to climate change. But so say these folks come back on their June 20th deadline and they have their next submit proposal. That doesn't mean that in the next year or so, things don't change again.
Right. And it makes me wonder also, they're having to put these plans together. Again, like you, I do not envy these people at all. But they're having to put these plans together with information that they don't have. Also, there's a lot of unknowns
Yeah.
in water around the state, and a lot of unexpected things that can happen with water around the state. So how can you plan for things that you have no way of knowing about? It is such a complex issue, and I hope that people, when they hear this, will understand that too and have a little compassion for the people who are having to put these plans together, while at the same time standing up for your right as either an agricultural professional or as a person in the community who has the right to access clean drinking water.
Yeah, and I won't even get into this because I don't know a whole lot about it, but there is also some loss, not necessarily to Kern County, but there are some lawsuits that are also surrounding the use of water in the area in general, the Tulare
Yeah.
Lake sub-basin, which covers most of Kings County. They're on probation until April. That's not exactly what we're talking about, but it all is the same uh, idea that we're talking about. So now we have even some lawsuits that are involved in this. And then what I'm learning, Sabrina, in my interviews here as well, is that all over, not just California, we have a retiring population of people who have this institutional knowledge, especially with regard to water. As they retire out and new leaders move in, they have to be brought up to par. And sometimes they don't have the same ideas or the same schooling or the same notions as those other folks do. And that institutional knowledge that we have counted on to make decisions like this is starting to retire out. I'm not saying this is happening in this exact situation. I'm just pointing it out as a discussion point in general, especially with regard to water issues.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's something that's happening throughout a lot of agriculture as well. We're losing a lot of that institutional knowledge, and that's not good. We need to retain as much of that as we possibly can.
Yeah, a lot of water experts, in my experience, just my experience, have been doing their job for a long time. And they know a lot. They know a lot about the numbers, the data, the research, the whys, the hows, the particular well capacities, the particular issues that go on with where they're managing and watching. So as those folks retire out, there could be a gap in that institutional knowledge.
This is completely off topic, but I think that that's where mentoring almost could come in. Is there there should be some type of mentoring program where some of the people involved in this can be mentoring students and people who are coming up in it to pass on some of that institutional knowledge, because especially when it comes to California water, we need new innovative ideas, but we also need to hold on to that wisdom that has come through the years of working with these different problems.
And I'm glad you brought that up. I actually have one of our regional water managers who's doing just that. He
Oh,
brought in another employee so he can mentor him as he gets ready to retire. But you make me think about like this whole discussion on the Colorado River. It's gone on for years. It's being more elevated now than ever. And a lot of the folks that are in charge, I would guess, I'm just guessing here, will be retiring out in the next maybe 5 years.
yeah. We need to hold on to some of that knowledge. We go to Cindy Zimmerman, who covered the recent ethanol conference. Here's Cindy.
Back to our roots was the theme for the 30th National Ethanol Conference in Nashville this past week. Renewable Fuels Association President and CEO Jeff Cooper says it was one of the most well-attended conferences they've had in many years.
We have a huge crowd here this year. I think this is the largest group of attendees we've had in 8 or 9 years. And I think it just reflects the growing interest in what's happening in the ethanol industry. I think it reflects the growing interest in trying to gain some insight and some answers into what changes in the administration are going to mean for the industry. I will say I think there's a lot of optimism in the industry, a lot of optimism we're hearing from attendees about the opportunities that are ahead of us, even with a lot of uncertainty right now, a lot of uncertainty around the regulatory environment moving forward. We've got, RFS rules that we're waiting on. We've got the E15 situation. We've got 45Z hanging out there. But I think at the end of the day, the industry remains very optimistic and positive about the outlook.
In his annual State of the Ethanol Industry address, Cooper highlighted the industry's pivotal role in American agriculture and outlined how ethanol can once again help the farm sector thrive in the face of current economic challenges if the right actions are taken by Congress and the administration. That includes protecting and expanding the renewable fuel standard, revisiting tailpipe emission standards, and bringing more certainty and stability to biofuel tax credits and trade policies.
Congress and the administration have a lot to sort out when it comes to our nation's tax policy, and that includes the future and fate of these IRA tax credits. And if there's one thing we know, it's that markets hate uncertainty. Maybe I should rephrase that. Markets absolutely despise uncertainty. But realistically, it may be a while before we have the answers we need on 45Z. And that's why, in the meantime, RFA believes Congress should strongly consider reinstating the suite of biofuel tax incentives that expired in December, including the second-generation biofuel producer tax credit. Temporarily bringing those credits back would provide a bridge to 45Z and give the industry more certainty.
Ethanol champion Republican Congressman Randy Feenstra of Iowa joined Cooper on stage at the conference to talk about the future of the Inflation Reduction Act and the clean fuel production tax credit included in it, known as 45Z.
You've been one of the leaders in Congress when it comes to advocating for not only preserving that tax credit, but potentially improving it and potentially expanding it, because a 3-year lifespan, which we're already, a couple months into, just isn't a whole lot. So can you talk about your perspective on the 45Z credit, its importance, and some of the work you've been doing there?
Yeah. So first of all, we have to go back to what did Trump say? Trump said we want to be energy independent. So how do we start looking at energy independence, right? It starts with growing our own energy, right? Ethanol. How do we do that? Well, that's where 45Z comes in. That's number one. Number two is we have all our producers. How can we help produce and make sure our producers are getting paid for what they're doing, for better environmental production and so forth, and making sure that we're not just using a supplemental like we did last year. And last year we passed a bill for $12 billion to give farmers to help them out. We don't want that. We don't want supplementals. We want to make sure that we have a place to go with our corn and soybeans, and that's where we have a 45Z and what it will do to grow our economy, what it will do to grow where our corn and soybeans go. And we're all fearful, right? We're all fearful of, okay, what happens with tariffs? Where does this all go? Well, if we have 45Z, we have an opportunity to absorb some of the issues that might happen with tariffs.
Meanwhile, nationwide year-round E15 remains the ethanol industry's top priority, and Congressman Feenstra expressed optimism that it could be included in the next continuing resolution after getting so close in the December CR.
Well, what we did is we said we were going to do a clean CR till March 15. So now we're back at the table again. March 15 is less than a month away, and we've got to pass a continuing resolution, or we've got to pass a budget for 2025. That's how behind we are. So we're back at the table saying, all right, Speaker, and I had dinner with him last week, saying this is one thing that we've got to include in this CR. And he just patted me on the back and goes, Randy, I heard you in December, and I hear you now. It's like, all right, but we didn't get it done in December, so we got to get it done now. So, we're, again, optimistic. I'm also optimistic, but we want it codified. We don't want executive order is nice, I get it, yep. but we really want it codified. We want it in law. And I really believe here in the next several months that this is going to happen. And really, there's really no pushback. I mean, there's just not a tremendous amount of pushback on this. So that to me makes it really easy to get it done. But we got to get it done. And with that, the U.S. Senate is really with us, too. I mean, I've been working with Senator Fisher and others. Obviously, Senator Thune, a very close friend. We're all working together to make it happen in March.
Some good justification for E15 can be found in RFA's latest economic impact report, which Chief Economist Scott Richmond says shows just how much ethanol helps farmers and the rural economy.
2024 was another very good year following on the heels of 2023. In terms of economic impact, we contributed over $50 billion to GDP. We generated over $25 billion in income and supported more than 300,000 jobs. More than half of the impact as far as GDP and income were in agriculture, and more than two-thirds of the jobs. So in terms of helping out in what was a somewhat challenging year for growers, ethanol came through again.
The winner of this year's RFA Industry Award was Rick Schwark, co-founder and recently retired CEO of Absolute Energy. And he pointed out just how vitally important the ethanol industry is to farmers and how important higher ethanol blends are to their future.
If you're a farmer or rancher, please stand. All right. I accept this award on behalf of every one of you because you are the root of the RFA. Thank you. You've heard this all week. I've got a different acronym for the RFA. They are the Remarkable Farmer Advocate. Everything they do is about the farmer first. I want to change one little vernacular here. We've heard a lot about E15. It's E15 plus. E15 is just the beginning. It is not the end.
Carol King, a farmer and chairman of Southwest Iowa Renewable Energy, or SIRE, participated in the Back to Our Roots panel at the NEC to discuss the beginnings of the industry and what they see for the future. And for him, the future is higher blends.
I think E15 is the first step, but beyond that, we got to start looking at the next was E20, E30. We sat on E10 too long, and it's not that we haven't been trying to go to E15, but we just got to keep pushing and find other avenues to get it done. Blender pups will make a lot of difference. We can just start doing it then.
That again from Cindy Zimmerman. And we're wrapping up the day today with some ag news. The new Agriculture Secretary revealed some of the various issues she and USDA expect to address in her first few weeks of the administration, as well as potential ways to address them. Here's Rudd Bain.
Prior to the President's Day weekend, on the patio at USDA headquarters, Texas's Brooke Rollins, welcomed by USDA officials, staff, and dignitaries one day after taking the oath of office as the nation's 33rd Agriculture Secretary. She joins Ann Veneman as women heading the Agriculture Department. During her welcome reception, she acknowledged,
American agriculture is in its worst economic straits in nearly a century, with grave challenges on prices, on markets, and on labor intersecting all at the same time. There is a great conversation underway among the American people about agriculture, food, and health.
Some of those issues and conversation topics she shared during her Senate confirmation hearing in January.
We must ensure that the disaster and economic assistance authorized by Congress is deployed as quickly and as efficiently as possible. We must work with the great men and women of USDA, the stakeholder communities, and state leaders to immediately and comprehensively get a handle on the state of animal disease outbreaks.
The Secretary admits the types of conversations producers and consumers are having about various farm and food sector issues are unavoidable, and in regard to USDA, should not be avoided.
We will be at the center of both, and we will meet them both with professionalism and patriotism that is the foundation of this department and our mission together.
Also expected to be part of Secretary Rollins' first year in office, advising Congress on behalf of USDA on the crafting of a new farm bill.
I am dedicated and committed to providing all of you with the timely technical assistance that we will need to ensure that we have a farm bill that moves forward.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
This has been the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. On behalf of Lorrie Boyer and myself, thank you for sharing your morning with us.
To get more information on the topics you heard today, visit AgNet West at agnetwest.com. You can also stay connected by following us on our social media at AgNet West on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Also look for Sabrina Halvorson on Facebook, and be sure to subscribe to our podcast by searching for AgNet West on your podcast app. Thank you for listening to the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. AgNet West Radio Network, your primary choice for agriculture news.